I met him when he had nothing. Not metaphorically nothing, literally nothing. No job, no car, evicted from his apartment, sleeping on his friend's couch with 2 garbage bags of clothes and a laptop he was 3 payments behind on. And I loved him anyway. I believed in him when nobody else did. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat while he tried to get his life together. I held him through panic attacks, talked him out of giving up, convinced him he was worth something when he couldn't see it himself. And the second he finally made it, the second he got the success and money and status I'd spent years helping him build, he looked at me and decided I wasn't good enough anymore. My name is Vanessa Cole, and this is the story of how I lifted a man out of the gutter, only to be thrown away the moment he reached the top, and how I made absolutely sure he'd spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he lost. I met Marcus Williams 5 years ago at a coffee shop where I was working my second job. He came in every day, ordered a small black coffee he'd nurse for hours while working on his laptop, clearly trying to make the $3 last. He looked defeated, exhausted, like someone who'd been beaten down by life too many times. We started talking. He told me he'd been fired from his finance job 6 months earlier after a mental breakdown, lost his apartment, was drowning in debt, and was trying to rebuild by freelancing but could barely find clients. Most people would have walked away. But I saw something in him. Intelligence, potential, a good person who'd just gotten knocked down hard. We started dating 3 weeks later. My friends thought I was insane. My mother actually said, "Vanessa, you're a woman with 2 degrees and a stable career. Why are you choosing a man who can't even afford dinner?" But I didn't care about money. I cared about Marcus. I saw who he could become, not just who he was in that moment. So, when he got evicted a month into our relationship, I didn't hesitate. I told him to move in with me. My studio apartment was tiny, but it was shelter. It was stability. It was hope. For the next year, I supported us completely. I worked my full-time marketing job during the day and waited tables 3 nights a week to cover our expenses. Marcus tried to freelance, but barely made enough to cover his phone bill. He was depressed, defeated, struggling with anxiety that sometimes left him unable to get out of bed. And I held him through it all. I paid for his therapy because he couldn't afford it. I bought his medication. I covered rent, groceries, utilities, everything. I did it because I loved him and because I believed that when someone's drowning, you throw them a life raft, not a lecture. Slowly, painfully, Marcus started healing. The therapy helped. The stability helped. Having someone believe in him helped. He started taking his freelance work more seriously. Started networking, building a portfolio, actually showing up like he had something to prove. I helped him update his resume, edit his proposals, practice for interviews. When he finally landed a full-time job at a startup, a huge pay cut from his old finance position but stable income, we celebrated like he'd won the lottery. Because to us, he had. It was the beginning of him coming back to life. Over the next 2 years, Marcus thrived. The startup grew rapidly, and he grew with it. He got promoted to senior analyst, then team lead, then director. His salary tripled, then quadrupled. Suddenly, the man who couldn't afford coffee was making 6 figures. We moved out of my studio into a real apartment with actual rooms. I finally quit my second job. We talked about getting married, buying a house, starting a family. Everything I'd sacrificed for, everything I'd believed in, was finally happening. Marcus had made it. We had made it. Except somewhere along the way, we became he. Marcus started working longer hours, attending networking events I wasn't invited to, traveling for conferences without suggesting I come. He'd come home talking about people I'd never met, colleagues, clients, connections. His world was expanding, and I started to feel like I was shrinking inside it. When I'd mention feeling disconnected, he'd say I was being insecure. When I'd ask to meet his new work friends, he'd say they wouldn't interest me. When I'd remind him how far we'd come together, he'd get irritated and say, "I worked hard for this, Vanessa. I earned this." If you're still watching, hit that like button right now. Because what happens next shows how quickly someone can forget who saved them when they were drowning. The changes became more obvious. Marcus started caring about things that never mattered before: Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, luxury cars. He'd criticize my outfits, suggest I upgrade my wardrobe, hint that I needed to invest more in my appearance. He'd make comments about my job, saying things like, "Don't you think you should aim higher?" Or, "Maybe it's time you got more ambitious." The man I'd supported through unemployment was suddenly embarrassed by the woman who'd made his survival possible. Then came the night that shattered everything. We were supposed to have dinner for our 5-year anniversary. I'd made reservations at the restaurant where we had our first real date, not the coffee shop where we met, but the place he took me after his first paycheck, when he could finally afford to take me somewhere nice. I got dressed up, excited to celebrate how far we'd come. But Marcus came home 2 hours late, distracted, barely apologetic. He looked at the restaurant name on my phone and actually grimaced. "Vanessa, we can't go there. That place is so dated. My coworkers go to Meridian now. That's where people at my level eat." People at his level. Like I wasn't there. Like I wasn't part of his level. Like the woman who kept him alive when he wanted to give up was somehow beneath the success she'd helped him build. I remember staring at him, this man I'd sacrificed years for, and seeing a stranger. We ended up not going anywhere. He said he was too tired. I spent our 5-year anniversary crying in the bathroom while he scrolled through his phone in the living room, texting people who apparently mattered more than I did. 2 months later, I found out why he'd been so distant. I was doing laundry when I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. Jewelry. Expensive jewelry. A necklace that cost $3,000. My heart stopped because he hadn't given me jewelry. My birthday had passed a month earlier and he'd given me nothing, saying he'd been too busy with work. So who is this for? I confronted him that night. Calmly. Directly. "Marcus, I found a receipt for a very expensive necklace. Who did you buy it for?" He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He just sighed, like I was inconveniencing him, and said, "Her name is Natalie. She works in corporate development. We've been seeing each other for 3 months. 3 months. 3 months while I was planning our future, he was building one with someone else." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "Why?" was all I could say. He looked at me with something close to pity and said words I'll never forget. "Vanessa, you're amazing. You were exactly what I needed when I was at my lowest. But I'm not that person anymore. I've grown, evolved, moved into a different world. Natalie understands that world. She went to Wharton, she speaks 3 languages. She fits into my life now in ways you just don't. You'll always be the person who saved me. But I need someone who matches who I've become, not who I was." I stood there, frozen, processing what he'd just said. I saved him. I worked 2 jobs to keep him alive. I paid his therapy bills. I believed in him when he'd given up on himself. And now that he was successful, now that he was evolved, I was too reminder of his lowest point to deserve his highest. I wasn't good enough for the man I'd literally built from scratch. Before I finish this story, subscribe to this channel and drop a comment about whether you've ever experienced this. Because what I did next changed both our lives forever. I didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't cry in front of him. I just said, "Get out." Marcus looked surprised, like he'd expected me to fight for him. "Vanessa, come on. Be mature about this. We can do this the easy way." I repeated, voice steady as steel. "Get out of my apartment." He had the audacity to look confused. "This is our apartment. I pay the majority of rent now." I smiled. A cold, knowing smile. "Actually, Marcus, this apartment is in my name only. I've been paying the rent for 4 years. You moved in when you had nothing, remember? So this is my apartment. And you have 30 seconds to leave before I call the police for trespassing." The realization hit him. In his rush to move up in the world, he'd forgotten that everything he stood on was built on my foundation. He tried to argue, but I was done listening. I opened the door and stood there until he left. He grabbed some clothes and walked out, still trying to justify himself, still trying to make me the unreasonable one. The door closed, and I finally allowed myself to break. I spent that night crying, grieving not just the relationship, but the years I'd given, the sacrifices I'd made, the future I'd imagined. But by morning, grief had transformed into something else, clarity. Marcus thought I was stuck being the woman who saved him. He had no idea what the woman who'd survived his worst was capable of at her best. I took the next week off work and did something I should have done years ago. I focused entirely on myself, updated my resume, reached out to old connections, applied to positions I'd been too busy supporting Marcus to pursue. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 interviews. Within a month, I had 2 job offers, both with significant pay increases. I took the one at a company Marcus had always wanted to work for, but never got past the first interview. The irony was delicious, but I wasn't done. I called my landlord and had Marcus's name officially removed from any association with the apartment. Changed the locks. Then I did something that would haunt Marcus forever. I reached out to his company's HR department. Not to cause trouble, just to correct a record. You see, Marcus had been telling people at work that he'd built himself up from nothing through pure determination, that he'd overcome adversity alone, that his success story was all his own resilience. I sent HR a detailed timeline, screenshots of rent payments I'd made when he had no income, receipts from therapy bills I'd covered, bank statements showing years of me supporting him completely. I didn't editorialize, didn't add commentary. Just facts, dates, amounts. Along with a simple note, I'm not looking to cause problems, but I believe in accurate records, and Marcus's story is incomplete without acknowledging the financial and emotional support that made his recovery possible. I thought the company should know who they're really celebrating. The fallout was immediate. Marcus's carefully constructed narrative, the self-made man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, crumbled. His colleagues started looking at him differently. His boss, who'd praised his independent success story, felt misled. And Natalie, his sophisticated Wharton graduate girlfriend, found out that the man she'd been dating had conveniently erased the woman who'd saved him from his origin story. Marcus tried to contact me. Angry messages saying I'd sabotaged him, that I was bitter and vindictive, that I couldn't handle him moving on. I blocked him. But I heard through mutual acquaintances that Natalie left him after 3 months. Turns out she didn't like dating someone who'd throw away a person who saved his life the second they were no longer useful. Funny how that works. My new job was incredible. Better salary, better title, better opportunities. I was promoted within 6 months to senior management. I traveled to conferences, built my own network, became the successful professional I'd always had the potential to be, but had put on hold to support someone else's dreams. And every achievement felt sweeter, knowing that Marcus was watching from a distance, finally understanding what he'd lost. A year after the breakup, Marcus showed up at my office building. He looked older, tired, humbled. He asked if we could talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed to coffee. He spent 20 minutes apologizing, saying he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, that he'd been an ungrateful fool, that he wanted another chance. He said success meant nothing without me, that he'd realized I was the only person who'd ever truly loved him, that everyone else just loved what he could do for them. I listened to all of it. Then I said something that I'd been waiting a year to tell him. Marcus, you were right about one thing. You did grow and evolve. You evolved into exactly the kind of person who forgets where they came from, who uses people and discards them, who mistakes someone's kindness for weakness. And I've evolved too, into someone who knows her worth, who won't settle for being someone's foundation while they build a life I'm not good enough to live in. You wanted someone who matched who you became. Well, congratulations. You became someone I'm no longer interested in matching. I stood up, left money for my coffee, and walked away. And it felt better than any revenge I could have planned. Because Marcus didn't just lose me. He lost the person he was when I loved him, the person who was humble, grateful, human. He traded authenticity for status and discovered too late that status is lonely when nobody actually knows who you are. Today, 3 years later, I'm thriving. I'm engaged to someone who values me, who brags about my accomplishments, who would never dream of erasing me from his story. I bought my own house. I mentor young women in my industry and tell them never to make themselves smaller to help someone else grow. True partnership means growing together, not being left behind. And every success I achieve, I know I earned entirely on my own merit, not by standing on someone else's broken back. My name is Vanessa Cole. I saved a man from rock bottom, and he threw me away from the top. He thought I was the reminder of his failure when I was actually the architect of his success. He wanted someone who matched his new level without realizing I'd been operating above his level the entire time. I'd just been humble enough not to make him feel small about it. And now he lives knowing that the best thing that ever happened to him was something he was too blind to appreciate until it was gone forever. This is what happens when you confuse support for weakness. This is what happens when you trade loyalty for status. And this is what happens when you forget that the person who helped you up can just as easily let you fall. They just choose not to because that's what real love looks like. Marcus learned that lesson too late. And I learned an even better one. My worth was never dependent on his recognition. I was always enough. He just wasn't enough for me.